Over the course of the past week, God had shown up with vivid visual encounters to reveal promises to me of how He would get us through such a difficult time. I remember coming out of those encounters feeling as light as a feather and with the excitement that I had been walking through heaven. Little did I know that was an instruction manual before a driving test that He would have me go through. The very moment that I came out of those encounters, it was like we rounded a corner and found ourselves on a high, dangerous cliff of a mountain. God was taking us through a path to promise that He had planned, but it was very narrow, and there were potential hazards that we would have to trust God to get us through. The first part of the path happened out of nowhere. The basket of support that God had sent us to cover the hotel where we stayed for more than a month was suddenly empty, or so it looked at that moment. It was as though there was an unexpected pit in the center of the road, and I had to act quickly to avoid falling into something horrible. Long story short, we had to leave, and we left in the middle of the night. I felt like I was with Mary and Joseph having to rush to relocate in the darkness of the night in order to protect the prophetic promise from the dangers of being attacked in the warfare. So we quickly gathered our things and rushed off to follow God on the path of promise. The path continued to be full of dangers, and it was like following a very narrow trail on the edge of a mountain. By that point, the winds of doubt and fear were starting to blow in, and I was faced with the exact opposite seeming circumstances than what God had promised. One thing I have experienced every single time is there is always a balance when God gives us something really big by faith and revelation. Those promised revelations will be equally tested with resisting conditions before they become fulfilled. That time just before the prophetic promise happens can be like walking through a tornado. Nothing will look like it is supposed to, and the warfare swirling around like tempest winds can leave our heads spinning in confusion. The promise has to become the anchor for our thoughts, and more than ever before, that is when you have to hold on to your hopes with an iron grip. It was a test of trust in whose report I would believe when I found myself stranded without a way to move forward. I was not sure of when God would deliver what He promised to send for the next steps. So we went to a nice rest area and waited on the rescue that God had revealed would come. There was a homeless man without a car at a rest area that was all bundled in a coat and sitting beside the entrance. Just seeing him sitting there in the cold concrete was both deeply humbling and incredibly scary for me. I had deep compassion and love for him, but at the same time I was sick to my stomach with the fears of our own dire situation. One of my promises from God through this time is that we would not be homeless on the streets, and that God would be our home by providing our refuge. So the fear of that homelessness is one of my greatest enemies against my promise. I cannot even express to you in words the pressure, fear, and heat of that moment. I had only a few dollars at that time, and I was also running low on fuel. It was like crickets in the night, and there was no one around to help us. There was no way to get through, or so it appeared. I had a moment when all the what-ifs were coming against me of how this outcome would be, or how devastating the path would become. As I faced the windstorm of possible bad outcomes all around me, I decided to no longer look at the things that the storm was screaming. I closed my eyes and I thought about all that God had promised. By faith, I took myself back to those heavenly moments that I had with God, and I remembered the plans that He had shown me about this path we are on. It was like an instant calm came over me, and I rejected those winds of bad outcomes and terrible fears being done. Just about the time when I was reflecting on the path that God had revealed and His promises about what would be done, something happened, and God made a way for us to move forward. The winds of fury against us quickly came to a halt. Someone who followed God's leading and not their own understanding quickly responded to God's nudges and sent us money that we needed to go someplace to find refuge. After being awake all night, I was very tired and so thankful to be blessed with a stay to lay my head. We found a hotel that the Lord revealed, and we paid for 2 nights there to recover. The part of walking through so many circumstances that are filled with many threats of bad outcomes or dreaded things being done is finding the personal path of promise that God has made for each individual journey. That is where the peace that calms a storm is found. From Jeremiah 29:11 in a Message, it says, "I'll show up and take care of you just as I promised and bring you back home. I know what I'm doing. I have it all planned out. Plans to take care of you and not abandon you. Plans to give you the future that you hope for." God always has a plan, a path, and a promise. One night God showed it to me like following a Pokemon Go route. The path is pre-made and we just have to follow where God is highlighting to get through it. There is always a way, although sometimes that way looks like something very narrow, like a road full of dangers on both sides, with the risks of falling off a mountainside. The one thing that is never failing is what God promised. As I prepare today to see where God will take us next for tomorrow, I'm looking to His promises and placing my trust in what He has revealed. For those with a promised outcome from God, you can usually plan to have to walk through the things that look completely contradictory to what He said. However, those contradicting, fearful things are not going to happen. They're like illusions of smoke that have no substance. God has a plan for every single situation you are facing. In Psalm 23 in the Passion Translation, that promise is revealed like this: "So why would I fear the future? Only goodness and tender love pursue me all the days of my life. Then afterward, when my life is through, I'll return to your glorious presence to be forever with you." I pray that God will reveal the next steps on your journey, and that the path He has for your individual way will be illuminated by His sweet, loving presence. God is with us through the path of promise, and knowing that is the greatest power to overcome every possible danger that may be threatening against your promised outcome. The path that I'm on right now, God had revealed to me like an aspen tree. One night I was sleeping, and just before I woke up, He said, "Come with me and follow me through the aspen trees, and I'll lead you to the place of tangible hopes." So that happened back in July, and God was telling me that He was going to take me through this time to write my next book of testimonies. I already wrote a whole book based on 3 years worth of testimonies of living by faith, and that's called Naked Wings. It's on my website, www.diamondsfromthedust.com. And like the first book, this second book that I'm literally walking through right now is full of last-minute rescues, facing really challenging obstacles and experiencing God's incredible and miracle love in action. Up until recently, all the things that I've gone through for the last few years, God had kept me keep those stories to myself and a few close friends, because He was having me walk through it first and then prepare for this next thing. To catch those up that don't know about my story, I took a massive leap of faith and followed God nearly 6 years ago when I was faced with being homeless. God had me book a hotel room in a city and a state where I didn't know anyone. I had no one to help me. I had no vehicle either. Before leaving, God gave me a promise to be our home and our support for the entire journey. And He said that He would help us get through by the writing I do on my blog. I didn't realize this journey was going to be so long, but I guess this is where I let go and trust God beyond my own understanding. The requirement was for me to share my stories openly with you and to be very transparent in all that I go through. And that was part of a struggle for me because I'm naturally more quiet, private. In this new place, in this new time, before we started back in July in this journey with God through the aspen trees of Path to Promise, God said the waves roaring against our survival at this time were much stronger than before when I wrote the first book, because we were finally coming to the end of our journey. Hallelujah. That means that sometime throughout this really difficult time, that God will open up our home that He promised, and I can finally rest from all the chaos and challenges of surviving by sheer faith and love from God. We've moved several times in the past and present, and it's been scary and wonderful. I've had to face so many fears, like money showing up to cover our stays at the last minute and not knowing how God would save us. The significance of the aspen trees was, and the reason God said to follow Him through the aspen trees was because God had showed me that the Greek name for aspen is shield, and they used to form shields out of aspen trees that the ancient people believed would protect the buried treasure from being taken away or stolen. After God told me to follow me through the aspen trees to the place of tangible hopes, we were scheduled to check out of our room, and I had no idea where we would go or even how we would pay for it at that moment. And just after God spoke that to me, I awoke to see that I received some money in my account. So after filling up the car with gas, God told me to follow Him to a whole different state where once again I didn't know anyone. And that's what happened in the very beginning when we were in Florida. But then God moved us to Michigan. So anyways, we drove to another state altogether, again, and after all that was said and done, I had enough money for one night in a hotel. We got to the room and I found a coin from France on the ground in the hallway. It was just 1 cent, but I believed that it was a symbolic of the gold treasure that God had promised to reveal. I looked up the room number meaning, and in Greek it means to dig or husbandman. I could see that God was leading us through the aspen trees of this trial to find the buried treasure that He had for us. Following God to promise looks a lot like surrendering away all your understanding and just trusting what He says when all the opposition is against you. He has given me several promises about where He'll take us through this journey, but there's also a lot of unknowns, because there are times when you just have to let go and let God and just trust His best interest for you. Trust that He has a plan for you and that He would never hurt you. I really believe that Abraham test, when he had to offer his son on the altar, I believe it came down to him trusting in who God was for him. And when you have an intimate relationship and a long-built experience with God, you know and you trust that He's not going to lay a harmful hand to you. He's going to protect you and love you and help you through. So when you're on the path to promise, it's a time of humbling, because you have to ignore every fear and doubt, and that feels like dying inside. It's hard not to allow yourself to be afraid or to doubt when you're literally staring down a mountain cliff and you're about to fall and it doesn't look like there's any way you're going to survive. And it's at that time you have to just be still and know that He is the Lord, and that He has a path for you to follow, that He is protecting you like a shield, that your enemies cannot get near you, and those fears cannot happen, and that God will rescue you. And even when it looks like there's no way to move forward, just trust and know that God has a path and a plan. And I pray that for whatever you're going through, or whatever you've been promised, that God would reveal that path to you, and that He would fill you with all the hope of believing, and that you would experience His joy and peace overflowing. I love you so much. And if you would like to keep up on the posts I share, or catch up, because literally I've been writing every couple days, very vulnerable, transparent stories, and I'm just now sharing it now after so many years. So that is at diamondsfromthedust.com. And this is Danette, and I am the one that's writing and recording them. Sending you hugs and love, and praying that blessings are wrapped around you, and praying that whatever situation that you face, that God's power would wrap around you and lift you over every opposition. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.